Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We've got people all across Ontario. Our presenter today, our subject matter expert with us is Sylvia Fung. I am Melita Vrakela, and my co-worker here and mate is Shweta Gupta. But back to Sylvia. Sylvia, her, has been teaching for over 20 years and is currently an ESL instructor and teacher trainer at Seneca College. She has an M.Ed and was a school teacher for the Toronto District School Board and a corporate trainer. She enjoys teaching workplace communication skills with special interests in pronunciation and socio-cultural awareness. I welcome you, Sylvia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for that introduction, Melita. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit about the agenda for today, what we're going to be covering. And on today's agenda, we have introductory questions, we have some discussion questions, and we're going to have some breakout discussions as well. But in addition to these things, I'm going to show you, and we're going to also participate in some online engagement strategies. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is we're going to poll you to just to see who our audience is right now. So I'm curious about you in the audience. So if you don't mind, we're going to pull up a poll, and this poll is going to ask a little bit about your situation right now. So Shweta is going to be helping us with the polls. So thank you again, Shweta. Here is the poll question number 1. I am currently, and I'm just curious about our current situation here. I'm currently teaching online, teaching in person, teaching hybrid or flexible classes. I know that means different things in different schools, and then not teaching. So if you wouldn't mind just selecting one of those, I'm just curious to see who our audience members are. Oh, lots of people teaching in person. And it's interesting because we're going to be actually investigating what's happening now after the pandemic. And I know a lot of classes are returning into in-person classes, but those of us who are still teaching online and those of us who are still teaching in flexible situations, what does that mean for online engagement? So that will be our focus for today. All right, so I have one more question that I want to ask, and this is, I'm going to invite you to put it into the chat. The question is, what are your top 1 or 2 challenges to online engagement for adult learners? So 1 or 2 challenges, right, for online engagement. And feel free to type it in the chat because I'm curious to find out, what are your challenges? Keeping student engaged, yeah, their attention span, yeah, they don't participate. Tech issues, that happens almost every single time. Interesting, right? And especially with the online environment, it's very hard to predict. And thank you, Shweta, for putting in the question again. Yeah, online works well with intermediate and advanced, but not so much for beginners. That's right. Yeah, so that's interesting. And I know that a lot of schools now are actually bringing students back into the classroom, especially the beginner students, when we're talking about ESL and EFL classes. Real communication. Yes, real communication. What does real mean? Like authentic communication. We're going to be talking a little bit more about this because it's not just the literary part of communication. It's not just the words and the sentences, but a lot of it is social learning as well. And how do we communicate in that kind of forum? That's our couple of poll questions that we have for you at the very beginning. We're going to start our conversation.
Let's try it. So the question is, how are adult learners different in the current situation coming out of the pandemic? Wow. I'm different, never mind the learners. So I'd like to hear some issues. Please, Sylvia, could you address that for us?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about this particular question. And where I'm coming from with this particular question is we need to understand the context that we're in right now. The context has shifted pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. And I've been actually very fortunate during the pandemic to experience many opportunities to teach, not just online, but also asynchronous, like totally asynchronous, as well as hybrid and flexible and high flex courses. So this has been a very interesting time. Now, what I wanted to focus on here is the particular context that we're in right now in 2023. You'll notice that students have a lot more choices when it comes to education, when it comes to classes, when it comes to choosing the schools that they go to. They also, and also because of the online environment, there's a lot of use of tech, which is good for some, not so good for others. And why I say that is because our current situation right now, and you'll probably notice it in your classrooms, is that we have multi-generational students. We have students who are Gen Z. We have students who are millennials. We have people who are even retirees coming back into the workplace, right? And so we have a wide variety of different students, and that makes engagement a little bit interesting. So that's why there is a compelling reason why we need to actually have engagement in our classrooms. There's also one more thing that I wanted to touch upon is the labor market trends. Right? And in the labor market right now, there is a low labor supply due to people leaving, due to retirement, and the pandemic has actually exacerbated that piece and sped up some people to say, oh, it's time to retire now. The Great Resignation, we saw a lot of people resigning in certain industries. We saw movement of people across different jobs, looking for different jobs that are higher pay, more flexible. And what does that mean for educators? It means that people are coming back to retrain and to upskill. So what does that mean for our classrooms in this context? Is we need to think about how are we going to help these students in the labor market now? How do we combine education with the workplace? And people are looking for bite-sized pieces of education that they can use now, rather than spending that 3-4 years to get that degree. Not to say that degrees are not useful or diplomas, those are still the gold standards, but they're looking for short pieces of, or bits, bite-sized pieces that they can actually digest and use right away. So what does that mean for our classrooms to keep them engaged? Right, so I just want to give those a few ideas, and I want to hear, I'm curious about your experiences and how you think your adult learners have changed.
We have Barb here. Sylvia, she says some adults have given up their language development because they got out of practice. So far, we've got this response. Thank you. Thank you, Barb.
Thanks for that. And it's so interesting, Barb, that you mentioned that, because when we were in the pandemic, what happened was a lot of people were reprioritizing, right? Well, what's important in their life? Family, better job, more work-life balance. So what does that mean? Does that mean I need to stay more with family? And what does that mean for language, right? Improvement. So very interesting.
I do online conversation groups, 6, 7, 8 students. And what I do occasionally is I bring a graduate student who's in the workplace and is experiencing the workplace back into the group, invite them to join the current group of ESL students that I have. So that creates a linkage between the real world and the ESL teaching context. And I'm thinking of doing a bit more of that to, like you say, to make more relevance from personal experience of graduates and bringing that into the ESL environment. I did that recently. And the graduate said, you don't need to worry about English. We live in Canada, it's multicultural. Don't get caught up about English. It's okay. Oh, no. You're going to be okay. So I found that a very encouraging thing that, English isn't everything. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
We also have a reflection from Sandra. Some people are more knowledgeable of technology, but some have also become fatigued by the format. Thank you, Sandra, for that contribution.
Yeah, and if I can just make a comment on that, that's very interesting because, as I mentioned, with the multi-generational spread that we have in the classes right now, and just to share from some of my classes, the past few semesters that I've been teaching, I've had students come back from retirement, meaning that I have upper 60-year-olds as well as in their mid 70s who are in my classrooms, and they're I don't want to say fear of technology, but they've been away from the workplace. They've been away from technology. And I've also had some students who have left the formal learning space for a number of years, 2-3 decades. And they were surprised when they actually came back and said, oh, doing academic papers is so much different now. So very, very interesting with the multi-generational students.
That's a great point, Sylvia. And just to further touch on that, I had a 91-year-old man, a doctor from his country, and he had a cell phone. And he was so knowledgeable in using this cell phone that I couldn't help him. He knew a lot more, obviously, than I did. So it also, as you said, multi-generational, it's kind of seeped into our lives, so to speak. It's become an appendage. So we are trying at the school board level to say, you know what, leave those phones off for now. Let's talk. People are having a hard time relating. They're not as communicative as they were. That's what I found after the pandemic. I don't know, did anybody else find that as well with their students? No one wants to talk anymore. Hi, Mark, how are you doing? Long time no see.
Hey.
Jump in. Do you have anything to say, sir?
Oh, not yet.
Not yet?
But I'm interested in that idea of students disengaging with face-to-face discussion because they are used to working on their phones and
Yes.
doing online communication. So simultaneously, there's a benefit there in that they are used to the online format, but I see a lot of microphones muted.
There you go. Point taken, right, Mark?
Yeah, and I've had classes similar to this in which the students don't want to be seen, kind of, and that's great. That's fine. They don't have to, but that's a point that something that I've experienced.
Great point.
We have another comment here in chat. 100% of my students have a job and they need flexible schedules. They will commit for the long term if they have the option of flexible scheduling. Thank you, Barb, for that contribution.
Thanks, Barb. John, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to pick up from what Mark was saying about students disengaging. I find even in person, if I'm with a group, some of them have their cell phones out. So I can see their face, but their head's lowered. So they're disengaged in person as well as online. So the cell phone really can be an impediment.
We have another one. Though I have been teaching online for nearly 6 years, most of my students are young learners. My adult students come and go quickly. I'd like to change that. I worry I'm doing something wrong for them to come and go quickly. However, I did have one stay with me for 2 years. Then her new business was spreading her thin, so she dropped her class because she wasn't waking up in time, which was 5 or 6 in the morning Korean time. I'm here to learn. I don't think I have much to contribute since my adult learners have only been a small portion of my teaching experience. I would like to gain more experience. Another comment I have is regarding behavior changes given being social in the classroom.
That's a great point. The behaviors are changing as well. I've got a Faten. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You had your hand up?
Yes, that's correct. It's Faten. I will speak about myself because before the pandemic, I was a student at a college here in London. And then the pandemic hit and I had to stay home learning online. So before the pandemic, I didn't know how to use the tech apps and the tools appropriately. I even was finding it hard to open my laptop and use it. But now I can say that I am professional in this, and I'm teaching now. And I gained a lot since the pandemic. I learned how to use these tech apps and use every way to connect with people using emails and whatnot. So I think this is a positive way of looking at the results of the pandemic. Thank you.
And yet your camera's off. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, because I'm not ready to participate using my camera.
If you're not ready, you're not ready. But
yeah.
but thank you so much. That was a great comment, actually.
Thank you.
What do you think, Sylvia? Shall we continue to the next portion?
Yeah, let's do that.
So these are our conversation discussion questions.
Yeah, so before we launch into those, we do have an exciting little engagement activity for you. And this is when Melita had invited you to bring a piece of paper. So I hope everyone has a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be small, it's just going to be a scrap piece of paper. And this is what I'm going to ask you to do. Hopefully you have a writing utensil with you, meaning a pen, a marker, a pencil, whatever you like to draw on, your lipstick. And the question is the question is this: what does online student engagement look like to you? What does online student engagement look like to you? Please draw it. I'll give you 1 minute.
You'll have to put your cameras on because we're going to have to see it, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to invite you afterwards to show us what your drawing looks like. So you don't even have to show your face. You just have to turn on the camera and show your drawing. Yeah, so 1 minute, if you can draw what student engagement looks like to you. And don't worry, we're not here to judge anyone's drawing skills. Just curious what you think it might look like.
Ooh, Shweta, I cannot see it. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Very nice.
It's their whole bunch of speech bubbles.
Very nice. I'm going to try mine as well. Oh, so there's me with no faces on. No one's showing their faces and I'm all by myself.
So let's all show it at the same time so then we can just take a look.
Okay.
Different.
Isn't that interesting? Look at that. And I see that there's a lot. I see a lot of happy faces and I see a lot of faces actually. And I'm assuming those are students. All right, thanks for sharing.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, some people say, oh, I can't get my students to turn their camera on. So there is a technique if you want to get your students to turn on their camera, because it's not necessarily seeing their face. For example, maybe it's something that you want to do to demonstrate that they've achieved something, that they understand the content, that they have achieved a certain objective. So that's just one strategy that we can use. All right, so let's launch our first question. Melita, back to you.
Thank you. So the question is, what are the ingredients to learner-centered design?
So let me give a little bit of context here in terms of the ingredients. What I really want to capture is, what are those things in your sphere of influence that you can control, putting the learner in the center? Right? So what are those things that you could possibly control? I'll give you some examples. For example, you can control yourself as the instructor or facilitator because you're controlling a number of things here. What are you controlling? What are you actually adjusting and controlling in your sphere of influence? Is, for example, the content. You get to choose the content, you get to choose the exercises, how long you spend on it, your lesson plans. And this actually, another ingredient, of course, is the learner, because the learner has to interact with that content. And then you also have to think about the classmates, the other people in the classroom. And that's also another ingredient. So you have the learner, you have classmates, you have content, yourself as the facilitator. The technology component is another ingredient, right, for online engagement. And then one last piece that I would say would be the learning environment, right? The environment that you create. So for me, the learning ingredients or the ingredients for learner-centered design would be the learner in the center, interacting with classmates because there's a social learning or social component to learning, the content because they have to interact with the content, the technology because they also have to interact with technology, the facilitator, obviously, because they have to interact with yourself, and you're actually giving them the guidance. And then the learning environment. How do you create that learning environment so that it is accessible, that is inclusive, that people can learn? So those would be some of the ingredients I can think of for learner-centered design, but I'm curious to hear what you think.
Wow. Sometimes icebreakers are a very good way just to begin, to create that learning environment, create a comfort zone, to say this is a lot of people want to hear this is a safe space. You can make mistakes here. It's all right. We will collaborate and share our experiences. One or two students are generally crickets in the room. They refuse to participate for whatever reason, and I don't force it. It's just a matter of time, I think. I don't know. What do you think, Sylvia?
Sylvia, we also have patience and understanding, group rooms, and then class share. Should also take into consideration the likes and dislikes students have regarding the format of the class. The initial needs analysis is vital to start off the right foot, on the right foot. So always do start with needs analysis, making atmosphere welcoming and a place for students to feel comfortable taking risks. Those are some suggestions in the chat by Josie, Sandra, Barb, if you want to, and Mark. Thank you.
Very nice.
Elizabeth has her hand up at
Yes.
this time. Elizabeth, please unmute to share.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would say the materials, right? Online materials as well. You know, what you use and is it applicable, meaningful and user-friendly?
That's important, absolutely.
Erin says, I really enjoy doing group and pair discussions based around relevant real-life topics and scenarios the learners have expressed previous interest in. Thank you, Erin.
If anyone teaches a lower level, for example, literacy, do you have any strategies and ingredients for that level? I'm always interested in the literacy group. How do you engage people who have very little English or are illiterate in their own language? How do you make that atmosphere accommodating? How do you get them even to speak or say anything? Anyone have any ideas?
I will add to that since I do teach lower level students. The beauty of teaching adults is that they come into our classes with a wealth of lived experiences and prior knowledge. So tapping into that prior knowledge and lived experience, we don't know all the language, but guess what? Google Translate does help. So having students, teaching students, and you may think that students don't know, but a lot of our adult learners, they are aware of Google Translate. They will use Google Translate and giving them that option of whatever way, just like right now we used visuals like those papers to share, whatever means we can find for students to contribute, whether it's to chat, through, just showing a picture of their work, using Google Translate, tapping into their peers who speak a similar language, and then sharing. What I'm trying to say is that even with literacy learners, it is up to us to find ways to engage them. We need to validate and know the fact that they know more than what we think they know.
Of course. Fatan, I believe you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, so adding to what Shweta had just said, I think using as authentic context as possible would be helpful. So for example, for once I was teaching beginners and I created incomplete paragraphs for them to complete using different words, and these paragraphs were related to their cultures, their different cultures, speaking about music or cultural dances or food. So they were very happy speaking about their own countries and cultures, and they, as Shweta said, began using Google translators to try to find the words that they don't know, and they were encouraged to speak.
Wonderful.
Thank
I
you.
also do a lot of echo reading in my class. So I'll display the text on, like, say, Jamboard or whiteboard, and I'll have them, the lower level students, repeat. They'd love to hear their voices. And that's an engagement part. Like, even if they're speaking to what is already written on the screen, but just to have them hear speak in a language that's not a native language is very encouraging to them. And even if it's a word, even if it's just speaking to the picture in their first language, letters, anything, just to get them to speak is very encouraging and engaging. And for you also, because you don't want to keep listening to your voice the whole time. So yes, creating an environment of choice is very important. Providing them support and reinforcement of their participation, affirmation, just, like simple clap like that. Of course, there's the emoji and the things, but as much as possible, replicating that environment of in-person learning and an online learning.
That's great. Music could be another one, I suppose. It's an international language.
Yes, music. Right. Providing timely feedback, descriptive feedback,
Yes.
not just like, hey, great job, like what is great. Just like when I want to know from my students, how am I doing? What did they like about the lesson today? Or what did they not like about the lesson? You don't want to just say it was a nice lesson. Okay.
Right.
What about it was nice? Barb is also saying the more relevant to real life, the greater the engagement. For example, if a student tells me she has a job interview coming up, we practice answering interview questions. They're likely to be asked based on the actual job advertisement. Thank you, Barb.
Great bunch of passionate people. It's wonderful what we do for our students. It really is. I don't think it's said enough. It really isn't.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to be kind to ourselves.
Yeah. Yes.
Because often we are very hard on ourselves, especially when we experiment with things that we're not familiar with. So I wanted to go back to this question because it's really asking about learner-centered design, right? So I think I've heard a few things that people touched on that are really important for learner-centered design, putting the learner in the center, right? So how do we plan and how do we engage the learner if we put the learner in the center? And what I heard was needs analysis. Needs analysis is really finding about what are their motivations, what are their goals? Because in order to achieve learner-centered design, you need to know what those goals and motivations are, including their preferences. So think about those ways of how to actually get them to provide that information to you. I've used pre-course surveys before the course even starts. If you have that luxury of doing that, you can consider using that, or icebreaker activities, right, in your classrooms. So you have a number of techniques that can be used to find out what are those needs, what are those goals, what are those preferences in order to design learner-centered classroom. And I also heard another comment about materials, making them meaningful, making them user-friendly. Also in the online space, making it accessible. Accessible meaning that there could be, again, a variety of different learners, some of them using technology where they need some kind of assistive device, or perhaps they don't necessarily they're not necessarily familiar with technology. So do you have another plan for them? For example, if they're not able to get into Google Jamboard, I heard, right? If they're not able to get into those tools, is there a plan B? Is there something else you could use for those types of learners so that they don't miss out? So things to consider when you're teaching in the online classroom of how to design for the learner.
We have Cheryl. 4 discrete skills are taught to meet PBLA requirements. Yes, that's true. Yeah. The listening, speaking, reading, writing. Yeah. Unfortunately, this has become restrictive. Oh, how so?
Yeah, with bringing in PBLA, because I've taught long before PBL came into existence, I have found that somehow in talking to other TESL teachers, that we are somewhat guided more in a sense to get these skills going so that they meet the requirements to move to the different levels. So that's what I mean by that. Unfortunately, you don't have a lot of time. If you have a large class, you're doing assessments, and you don't have the time to be super creative as we could be in the past. So you have to kind of be a bit of a magician some days. And not to put, you know, what's going on right now, but people have lives and they come and they go, and sometimes they leave the class early, and you have to allow for all these little idiosyncrasy type things that go on. And yeah, so overall, it's not a perfect world. We just have to be flexible and adapt, like someone said, to the needs of the students in the moment. And as you progress, hopefully they're keen enough. I always tell my students that, you know, you've got to keep coming, because, you know, if you miss classes, there's other things that will happen that may not be positive for you, as well as your learning curve. You're not going to advance as quickly as you'd like to, because most people want to advance. I mean, that's why they've chosen to join the class. And yeah, I try to inspire and also
And
keep.
what do you teach, Cheryl?
Sorry, I teach above advanced and I'm not, yeah, higher levels.
Okay.
I'm a native speaker, so yeah.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I want to listen to them because I can learn. I always start my class letting them introduce themselves, because right away, when you give the students the chance to speak about themselves, it's twofold. I get an idea as to their, what do you call it, their level,
Right.
if you want to call it that, their abilities. And it also gives them practice, because if they live in an environment where there's no one speaking English in the home, this is just another added advantage to, you know, letting them production.
Yes. Thank
So,
you.
yeah.
Nice. Are we ready to continue there?
Yeah, let's move on.
How do we transform these ingredients into a great educational experience?
All right, so we had talked about all those things within your sphere of control or sphere of influence. And then now I'm curious to find out, how do we put those ingredients as we are making a cake? How do you combine them, right, to create a great educational experience? And why am I stressing on educational experience is because, again, when I mentioned about how has learning changed since the pandemic and after the pandemic, one of those particular things is that people have a lot of choices now. And one of the things that will keep your students in the class or get them to choose your school or perhaps your class or the course that you're teaching is that educational experience. So how do we create that experience for them? And I wanted to just bring about the theory of the community of inquiry. And perhaps some of you have heard this before. There's 3 components to the community of inquiry. The first one is social presence. So as I mentioned before, language learning there's a social component to it. They need to be able to interact in order to learn communication skills. Then there's also the cognitive presence. So there's 3 presences. There's the social presence, the cognitive presence, and the teacher presence. The cognitive presence is really the engagement with the content. So how does the learner actually engage with the content? Whether it's a textbook, whether it's online materials, whether it's collaborative tools, how do they engage with that content and learn the things that you want them to learn, whether it's grammar points, whether it's talking together, like whatever the function that you're trying to teach, whether it's apologizing, whether it's who's ordering in a restaurant. So that's the cognitive presence piece. How do they interact with the content, the engagement with content? The last piece is the teacher presence. The teacher presence is really the engagement with the goals and direction of that particular course. So the instructor or the facilitator is able to provide that structure, those goals, those learning objectives to guide the social presence and also the cognitive presence. So again, those three presences or those three elements are social presence, the cognitive, and the teaching presence. And if you think about it in a Venn diagram with three circles in it, where it intersects is, and I think of it as a like a campfire, because really what the instructor is doing is they're igniting that fire, that campfire, to mix up all of those ingredients. And so that's what we mean by the community of inquiry, are those three pieces. And that will help you create an excellent or a great learning experience. Okay, and there's one more thing before I go into the chat, and I'll pass it over to Melita and to Shweta to see if there's any comments in the chat. One additional thing that I wanted to point out is, how do we create that experience through what we do in the classroom? And some of you may be familiar with the learning pyramid, where student retention, or what they retain, is actually dependent on the type of technique that you use. So for example, if you lecture to them, they only retain about 5% of what you teach. Versus if you allow them to do some reading, maybe they retain 10%. If you have some audiovisual, that goes up to 20%. If you demonstrate to them, it goes up to 30%. But if you actually really want them to retain that information or that knowledge or whatever content, you actually have to get them to interact with the content and others. So practicing, role playing, and then also getting them to teach or to talk about or to present the information. That will help with the retention. So you may have heard about the learning pyramid. And one additional thing is the Bloom's taxonomy. For those of you who are familiar with the Bloom's taxonomy, it has various phases of lower order thinking skills and higher level thinking skills. And when we look at Bloom's taxonomy, we really want to think about what are those words or what are those verbs that we want to use that we can incorporate into our teaching practice. So for example, rather than just having multiple choice questions, that's for recognition of the content, how about words like Googling? And how about words like highlighting, compare and contrast? Those use a little bit of the higher order thinking skills. So how do we transform some of those learning activities to be more engaging and to use those higher order thinking skills? So that's, if you want to take a look at Bloom's taxonomy, it's actually Bloom's digital taxonomy of verbs. If you want to take a look at that, there's a whole list actually of all those different verbs that you can use. All right, and I'll pass it over back to Melita and Shweta to see if there's any comments or questions.
We have another contribution from Cheryl. Cheryl, would you like to read your contribution?
Sure. What about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of the individual? This may be on the student, him or herself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can provide the incentive, but if you've got a student sitting there just staring back at you and you offer participation and you do role playing and debates and everything else, there's always a few, that are either just not ready, maybe. So it is incumbent on the teacher too, right, to continue to motivate as best as they can. Just throwing it out there.
Good. Anyone would like to comment on that? Like to share? No, I don't see anyone. Do you, Shweta?
No, but I can contribute or expand on, I was thinking because I had done some work or research myself on cognitive, social, as well as teaching presence. that altogether cultivate and build this holistic educational experience on it. So I was going to give some, from my experience, some of the aspects within each of those categories, but I've just seen a hand go up from Erin. Before
Okay.
I get carried away and hijack the conversation, I'd like Erin to please take it away. It's your floor, Erin.
Thank you. I was just thinking about what Cheryl had said. And I think it's important that you find out why they're not participating. Because it could be all sorts of reasons, and maybe it's easily addressed with something like maybe it's a learning disability and they need extra support. Maybe it's a confidence issue that you can work on, doing some things with them that are a little less intimidating. Finding out maybe what would help them to participate, like is it an interesting, things like that.
Okay, thanks, Erin.
Thank you,
Yes.
Erin.
Thank you. Erin, I would concur with it. And Cheryl, so I'll piggyback on what Erin has said, that in terms of motivating students, understanding why they're taking our classes, why they're doing the things that they're doing, why there's behavior. So why is important, making things relevant to them, find out what motivates them. Again, going back to, this may be on the student, but this may be also on the teacher, finding out what motivates them, maintaining a certain sense of self-esteem, having fun during the classes, or something that they would want to come and look forward to attending, adding that to the social presence aspect of our educational experience, creating activities like Sylvia had mentioned, so that they're actively involved in learning, hence the social presence as well. Assessing their own skills and strategies, giving them a sense of control over their own learning, not relying so much on the finalized answers or correct answers as sometimes we may as teachers. So again, tapping into the cognitive presence, as in what else, what could be an alternative, if not this, then what? So prompting questions like that, finding that sweet spot or the zone of proximal development, so that we are just stretching them, challenging them just enough, but then also tapping into their prior knowledge or lived experiences, and giving them lots of opportunities online, in person as well. Students do, as much as they're coming out of pandemic and we say that they're not interacting, the thing is that they do want to socialize with each other, they want to collaborate with each other. Somehow they don't know how to socialize with each other. Somehow we need to help them productively collaborate and socialize with each other. So those are some of the things that I was gonna.
That's an excellent point.
I think the
Excellent.
last point is a good point, but if you're teaching online, I mean, you've got your chat rooms, you've got your breakout rooms. Yeah, that's a way to encourage, smaller group, especially for the people that are a little more intimidated, or, the older adults, you can get a variance. Some are very engaged with their families, so they have to cut out earlier, just different levels of understanding of the computer,
Right.
and things like that. Yeah.
Sylvia, did you want to add anything?
I'm just listening, and this is a really interesting topic, or a very interesting question, and a lot of discussion around that. In terms of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, yes, I had mentioned about the teaching presence and how you create that in your classroom, but also being aware that engagement, what does engagement mean? Right? Engagement doesn't necessarily mean participation per se, because participation can be very, the students providing only one-word answers, or it looks like they're participating because they joined your online class, but maybe they're just there, but not mentally there. So participation doesn't necessarily equate to engagement. And some people engage in various ways. And I know this from my workplace now that I've met some really, really introverted people, right? However, what they actually tell me is that they are engaged and they've never thought of things that way. And through their own reflection, right? And giving them the opportunities to share those types of reflections, whether it's through writing or their preferred way of expressing it. So just a point there. And I see
Great
that
point. Wow.
yeah,
Great
John
point.
has his hand up as well, so I'll leave that and maybe
Thank
John
you.
can contribute
We
his
have
thoughts.
John with his, and we also have a mention from Mark about surveys and needs assessment. Fatin has talked about participation can sometimes be robotic, and John has his hand raised at this time.
I'm just wondering if there are any examples of role playing online. If anyone has any ideas to share. I sometimes do breakout rooms and sort of, you know, scenarios in the restaurant. What do you do in this situation? But it'd be interesting if anyone has experience doing role playing online.
Fatin?
Yeah, so John, I wasn't teaching at that situation. I was a student teacher at that time. So my mentor was giving real roles. I mean, she was teaching a play and students took different roles in that play, and each one was just reading the lines from the character he or she chose. And in that way, they participated and role played chapters of that play. Thank you.
I also use the same thing. Andrew Taylor, he works at Peel. He has a book out on conversations. So whether it's employment related conversations, but I tend to use some of his resources, but that's in print, not that I know in person. The other resource that I just type Readers Theater, and online. If you want, you can type ESL or type Readers Theater employment, and then scripts come up where students take turns reading different roles in breakout rooms. So a collection of Readers Theater scripts will pop up if you just type Readers Theater. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. Well, I see our time is coming up to almost 4 o'clock. If there are any other comments, it's ticking away quickly. So many wonderful examples. Cheryl, did you want to speak to anything?
Oh, I was just thinking with all these elections coming up, especially people that live in Toronto, you could practice people having different roles, you know, teaching them about voting and what has to be done. And this person takes on this role, and there's a returning officer, and there's a poll clerk, and there's lots of goodies there that you can teach. And especially in the higher levels where they've been in classes trying to get their citizenship, and it's a great learning opportunity coming up in a couple of weeks when they vote for the mayor of Toronto.
Brilliant.
We also have some contributions from in chat. Mark says job interviews. I think these are in responses to what John was saying in terms of role plays. Erin says job interviews and medical appointment role plays in pairs in breakout rooms with alternating roles. Barb says a sense of control over their own learning is really important. In the lives of some students, having control over their learning is the only area of their lives where they have some control. Tasks that require intellectual focus can provide a refuge from a life that may otherwise feel chaotic. Mark also says speeches. We have a link, thank you to Risa, for eslfast.com, and I've just clicked on it, and it seems like it is role plays for different grades.
Great.
Different grades. Yes, thank you so much. Please, if you have an opportunity to explore eslfast.com. Thank you.
Great. All right. Let's continue, Sylvia, then, please.
Yeah, let's do that. Time for breakout rooms. So the question is this: right? What are some online engagement strategies that you used for adult learners? And how do you assess whether your engagement strategy was successful?
Here we come. Oh, I saw Sean briefly. Derek, now we're seeing these gorgeous faces. I love it. Thank you.
Fill in the gaps. That's what I was saying.
Wow, look at that. Amazing. Amazing.
So welcome back, everyone. So thank you for your contributions on Padlet. Sylvia, would you like to read a couple of them or debrief or?
Yeah, so I was looking at it, and the great thing about Padlet is when you're in your breakout rooms as the facilitators, we can actually just look at the Padlet to see who's engaged, who's completed the task. So it's a great little tool without having to actually go into the breakout rooms. So that's one little thing that you can do. And I see that there's a number of different strategies that people have posted, for example, in the cognitive space or cognitive presence, authentic materials. And we had talked about this in the discussions, as well as using visuals and content based on the needs. We really stressed on the needs and the goals and the preferences and understanding that. And then for social presence, I see a lot of strategies for breakout rooms and for role playing, for introductions, so excellent strategies, and also for teaching presence. And how do we demonstrate and model the activity? And that's a very important piece. And then we also have other things about, getting clippings into the classroom and using authentic materials to show some teacher presence there. So interesting and great ideas. Thank you again for participating in this Padlet. It will be available afterwards, so you can always go back and take a look at it. So back to Melita and Shweta.
Okay. Are there any other comments before we continue?
Do we share, I'd stop presenting. Let me know when to launch the poll number 4. Let me
Should
know.
we do it now? Let's do it now.
Okay.
All right, so this is the last poll for today, and just getting an idea of the online engagement techniques that we used today, and we used quite a few of them. Which one was your favorite? Was it the video music introduction at the very beginning? Was it the facilitated discussion where you had a chance to participate? Was it the poll questions? Was it the drawing activity? Was it the breakout discussion or listening to others? Remember, we're talking about engagement. It doesn't necessarily mean participation per se, but it could be just listening to other people's thoughts and ideas. Or was it the collaborative tool, the Padlet? So if you wouldn't mind putting in that your response, what was your favorite?
Yeah, these breakout rooms are generally a hit. People need to, oh, spoke too soon.
Okay, we have 84% participated. I am going to end the poll at this time and share the results. Sylvia, if you'd like to speak to the results.
Sure, I can do that. And so I see facilitated discussion, 38%, which is tied with the breakout discussion. Very interesting.
Yeah,
yeah,
excellent.
Listening to others, 6%. And then the Padlet tool, 19%. So that's interesting. Thank you for your participation in that. And Melita, just letting you know that we see your screen right now.
Oh, yes, I'm fiddling with it. Here we go. So there's Sylvia, beautiful Sylvia Fung, for her presentation. Forever thankful. As always, it's getting more engaging, people. I love it. Next time we'll maybe see more faces and hear more voices. Shweta, thank you so much. You really came through for me with these electronic techie things. You're amazing. Your PD certificates, as always, will be emailed to you using the email address you used to register for this event. It will take up to 7 days. There's a survey too. You don't want to forget the survey. Very important. What's important is if we can improve, what can we improve on, how we can help you have a better TESL dialogue. My special thanks to my friends Mark and John for coming online, and a few other ones with their cameras. It was wonderful. And the upcoming events are the TESL Dialogue, Cultivating a Culture of Academic Integrity. Sounds deep. TESL webinar, Using Images for Speaking and Writing Activities. And the last one is, we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you. Wishing you great wealth and health. And the summer's coming. Oh, I like that. That's great, Mark. Summertime's coming. We can relax, put our feet up, maybe join John at the lake. Yes, let's do that. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.